Marie Tendler, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. It's so interesting to interview somebody I've known for so long. Other than Bianca and my brother, you're probably the person I've known the longest who has come on the show.
I'm very nervous.
You are?
Yes. Even though I feel like I shouldn't be because I know you, but I am.
Well, hopefully that will fade as we go through it. Is this one of your first interviews you've done?
This is the first interview that I am doing for the book.
Okay. All right. Well, I know how that feels.
No pressure.
I know how it feels to have written a memoir and then to go talk about it. And it's hard. So you have a lot of empathy on the other end of this conversation.
Thank you.
Well, let's get into it. I know we have to step gingerly around this, but can you just describe, to the extent that you're able or comfortable with, the conditions that led up to you checking yourself into, I don't know what the right term would be, a psychiatric care facility? Was that the right way to describe it?
A psychiatric hospital? Yes. That is the correct way to describe it. It was a private hospital. It wasn't a state hospital. So those are, I think, quite different experiences. But yes, it was January 1st, 2021. And I had been dealing with some pretty serious mental health issues. I mean, basically my whole adult life. But I think there were a combination of a lot of things going on in my life at that time. Also, COVID was happening, and part of my anxiety is germophobia. So a global pandemic is literally my worst nightmare. And some things in my personal life, I think probably medication that needed to be adjusted a little bit. It was sort of just like a confluence. I was finishing graduate school. I think part of it was situational, but part of it was just chemical. And I became incredibly suicidal. I basically stopped eating. I was engaging in a lot of self-harm. And it got to a point where my therapist at the time was like, you need inpatient care. This is beyond just what you can deal with a therapist.
I know this is a very sensitive area, but the self-harm, can you say a little bit more about that? Because in preparing for this interview, I learned more. I don't think we've talked much on this show about self-harm. And in preparing for this interview, I sort of learned through you a little bit more about why people do that. But can you do some education here?
Yeah. So, well, I certainly don't think I'm like the poster child for self-harm. And I think that people come to it for different reasons and people do it for different reasons. So I can kind of speak to the reason why I was doing it, and so it feels very personal to me, and it might not be what resonates with other people. But I started when I was 14, and it was a very destructive way for me to deal with emotions that I otherwise couldn't deal with. I didn't have the language to express it. I didn't have the ability to kind of like sit with very difficult emotions. I was very angry. My life felt very out of control, which I think when you're a teenage girl, life does feel very out of control. And so I came to it sort of as a way of like coping with that. I was feeling so much that I couldn't describe, I couldn't process, I couldn't handle. And that was a way to feel in control.
Would a rough analogy be when I'm getting a shot, I will squeeze some other part of my body because I can control that pain, but I can't control the pain from the shot.
Yeah, it was like a pain that made sense to me because I could see it. I knew exactly where it came from. And when I'm saying all this, I feel like I have to be very careful not to make it sound like a good coping skill because it is 1,000% not. There are a million other things that you can do that have that same effect, but I didn't know what they were at the time. And yeah, I would say that was exactly it. It was like, I can't make sense of all of the pain and the anger that I'm feeling. I'm channeling it into something that makes sense to me. If you hurt yourself, you're going to feel it. You know where it came from, especially if you did it. And it is something you have control over.
And just to put a fine point on it, the self-harm in question here was cutting yourself?
Yes. I mean, I do also think that restricting eating is a form of self-harm. And that was something that, you know, as I write about in the book, it started as just like an anxious response to my surroundings of being like, I literally feel sick, I can't eat, but then snowballed into something a little bit more intense and destructive.
I'm glad you said earlier that you're what I hope should be obvious to everybody, that you're not recommending self-harm. And I'm sure you would say that same thing about restrictive eating. That, and it seems like at the core of both of them, I'm glad you made the connection too between the two, is, and this is a huge theme in the book, not being able to sit with pain. So we all, I mean, this is a universal issue. We all experience uncomfortable emotions. How are we going to deal with them? You found some dysfunctional ways to deal with it, and that's what landed you in the hospital.
I didn't have access to the functional ways to deal with it, which I think a lot of people don't. And also, I mean, you know this as being a meditator, like it is difficult to sit with difficult feelings. So learning how to do that and sort of be okay with that it's hard work.
Yeah, you could argue it's like the work of being a human being.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the hospital stay was really transformative in this regard in particular. And one of the techniques that you picked up was something called DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, which is another thing that I don't think we've talked about much on the show. I know we've talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you teach us a little bit about what DBT is and how or whether it's worked for you?
Yeah, DBT saved my life. It changed my life. It was developed by a woman who was really struggling to get any sort of care for bipolar disorder. And so originally it was developed for people with bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder. And as it started being used, people started to realize like, oh, this is also amazing for addiction. This is also amazing for self-harm. This is also amazing for anyone who has mood issues, has trouble controlling their emotions. And basically what DBT is it's set up in 5 modules, and you go through these modules, one of which is mindfulness. And you learn how to act opposite of your destructive instincts. You learn how to sub in more constructive coping skills, both when you're in acute crisis and just every day when you're not in acute crisis. You learn how to have more effective interpersonal relationships, sort of how to talk to people, how to get a difficult point across. I've done DBT multiple times now. Usually going through all 5 modules takes about 6 months, and I've done that 3 times. And I truly believe that there isn't a single person who wouldn't benefit from DBT. It is like basic life skills that when you're learning them, you're like, this is common sense. Like, this is so, why am I learning this? And then you realize that, oh yeah, it is common sense, but these are not things that when you're in an acute state of stress that you are naturally able to access. And doing DBT and sort of exercising these skills allows you to be able to access them when you are in grief, when you're in crisis, when you're about to have a panic attack, really like any emotion that is difficult.
So walk me through like how it works for you now. Just say, well, you're nervous about this interview, or you're nervous about putting your book out, or, you know, you get a shitty text from a friend or whatever, or if it's even something more grave than any of those, how do you, when the rubber hits the road, how do you apply it?
This is another thing that I think is really interesting for DBT is that everyone has a different way of applying it. So like there are so many skills that you can use, and you sort of find the ones that work for you. And what works for me may not work for someone else, and vice versa. So for me, basically, when something really intense happens, the first thing that I do is kind of stop and like take deep breaths where I'm very aware of the breaths that I'm taking. I don't make any sudden actions. I kind of repeat back to myself, okay, what are the facts of what's happening right now? What does this text say? What is, what's the thing that's happening that's making me anxious? I identify what that thing is. So, like coming into this interview, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling anxiety. I know that it's because I'm about to talk about this book. And what if I fuck up? And what if I'm, say the wrong thing? And so you kind of identify the reasons why you're anxious and what is actually going on. And then I personally do something called checking the facts, which is you separate the facts from the assumptions that you're bringing into it, which also, it removes I don't want to say it removes emotion from it, but it removes your first instinctual emotion, which is not always the one that you want to lead with, as I know that you know. So it sort of interrupts that for me, and it gives me time and it to sort of like, okay, what's going on here? Like, how do I want to approach this? How do I want to answer this? How do I want to deal with this? And then, if it's anxiety, okay, I'm going to now figure out some coping skills that I can do. And that can be anything from like, I'm going to sit. Before this started, I sat, I closed my eyes, I took 3 deep breaths where I like breathed in for 3, I held it for 3, and then I exhaled for 6. And I did that 3 times, and I was kind of like, okay, I can feel myself getting calmer, or maybe I'll go for a walk, or I'll, there are so many different things that you can do. And then it just gives your brain time to actually look at what's happening, separate your emotion from the facts of it, and figure out how you want to respond to it.
Yeah, one of my favorite cliches in the meditation world is respond, not react. And it sounds like you've learned through DBT how to do that.
Yeah, and that's sort of the point of DBT. And they always say, like, when you're starting DBT, it can feel very mechanical, where you're like, okay, this is what's happening. What do I do now? It feels odd to sort of interrupt your natural way of being in this way. But the more you do it, the more second nature it becomes. And now, my brain doesn't go through all the steps one by one. It just sort of naturally knows what to do. I mean, not always, but a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, it's actually useful for you to say that, because I think people get into any form of self-improvement or personal growth and expect perfection, but that is not going to happen.
No, and it also doesn't, as I'm sure you know as well, like, it doesn't make the initial feeling about something disappear. It's not like I don't get mad about something, or, if I'm not a person who has a lot of arguments, but let's say I do have an argument with someone in my life, like, it's not like I'm not mad. I am, but in the moment, I can interrupt myself, my brain, and think, okay, how do I want to react to this? What is the most helpful way to react to this?
It's about going through these steps. I heard 3 steps. One is like stop instead of just habitually barreling forward with that first emotion. The second is kind of analyze with some, to the extent possible, dry eyes. And the third is employ those whatever coping skills work for you, from breathing to walking to whatever.
Yeah. And I think the line is, or like what people go to first is different for everyone. But there is something in the mindfulness module, which I think you'll appreciate, which is like emotional mind, what they call emotional mind and wise mind. And you're trying to approach things from your wise mind, which is like, again, this is a mindfulness meditation technique of sort of separating yourself from the emotional mind, the immediate emotional reaction to something.
Yeah. I mean, you can think about this on a brain level, and I'm sure I've never taken DBT, although I can imagine it would be useful for me. On a brain level, the emotional brain, is kind of like toward the back right above the spine, that's kind of sometimes referred to as the reptile, sort of lizard brain.
The amygdala.
The amygdala, the fear centers and the limbic system, all that. Yeah. And then up front of the newer parts of the brain that only the humans have, to my knowledge, of, the prefrontal cortices. And they can't fire really at the same time. So if you can stay in logical, reasonable brain regions, you're taking the amygdala offline, and the reverse is true as well. And like for me, so if I can feel a panic attack coming on, like if on a plane, I'm feeling claustrophobic, one technique that I learned in doing exposure therapy is like putting a number. What is the number out of 10 of my fear level right now? And that actually just forces you into the prefrontal cortex, and you can't do as much fearing in that zone. Does that all land for you?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's the same concept as like your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system can't be functioning at the same time. So when you go into states of like deep breathing, you're forcing the parasympathetic nervous system to fire and function, and it takes you out of the sympathetic nervous system. And there are also a lot of things in DBT for that sort of acute panic, where it's like there are times where you can't break yourself out of the panic attack. And then there are physiological things that you can do. One of them is literally going face first into an ice bath. like holding your breath and going face first, because it fires the like dive mechanism in your brain, and your brain goes into survival mode and is like, oh, I'm going into water face first. I have to hold my breath so I don't drown. And it will pretty much immediately take you out of a panic attack. Hard to do on a plane.
Yeah, it's hard. I was just going to say, not a lot of ice baths available in the middle seat in coach. I have a maybe kind of embarrassingly obvious question, but what's it like in a psychiatric hospital? And I know this was a private one and not, one flew over the cuckoo's nest, but what's the, I'm being slightly facetious here, but like, what's the vibe?
Well, that's basically what my whole book is about. So, I describe all of that in the book, but it's, I think it also depends when you're there. So I was very lucky to be there in the first 2 weeks after the new year, which is a very quiet time of year. So for most of the time I was there, it was just me and 4 other people. And it was quiet, and I really, really liked all of the other girls that I was there with. And I think that something I tried to get across in the book when talking about it is there's sort of a monotony to it that that is almost like a walking meditation. I think like things are very still and kind of quiet, or at least they were for me. And you have a routine, and your day is sort of the same every day. You're going to these groups, and you're going from this building and back and that building, and there is like a contained monotony to it that I found very comforting. Yeah, I'm sure that there are times when it's not like that. And I do, I write about in the book how by the time I was leaving, the house that I was living in was much more full of people, and that the quiet of it was a bit disrupted. So I think a lot of my experience of it had to do with the time that I was there as well.
Did you create a lot of close relationships?
I did while I was in there, not that I kept up with once I was out. But I did. It is a very singular experience, and you're sort of forced into these living situations with people that you've never met before, and then you get to know them very quickly, I guess, in a way. And it's an intense experience, but I was very lucky to be with a group that they were just so interesting and really cool women.
You learned a lot about yourself in this experience. And there's one quote among many. I'm going to get in the habit of reading you little chunks from the book and then getting you to talk about it. But this is a very small one to start. But one of the doctors says to you, and this is the quote from the doctor to you, "There's a you inside that feels invisible to those looking at you from the outside." Why was that such a big revelation for you?
I've always had anxiety. I've always had depression, but I have always been incredibly high functioning. I wasn't a person who couldn't make it to school or couldn't make it to work. I continued to show up for things, and I spent a lot of my life feeling like my internal experience was wildly different than my external experience in the world, and how people were experiencing me. And I felt often, I guess, at war with myself in that sense, where when I went through the psychological testing, and this doctor who had never met me before, the day that he tested me was the first time we had ever met. And so I knew this, whatever this assessment of me was going to be pretty objective based on the testing. And there were so many things that were mirrored back to me about my experience in life, how I go through life, how I present this incredibly sturdy exterior, and I'm able to do that even when I don't feel that way internally, was hugely healing. I think it was the first time in my life where I felt like a person kind of saw my internal experience.
So here's what the doctor says to you.
Yes.
You have tendencies toward orderliness, persistence, careful deliberation, and focus. You're cautious, detail-oriented, and try to actively manage situations and tasks. My assumption is you are also very reliable and dependable. You likely react very strongly to situations that have the potential to evoke fear, anxiety, sadness, guilt, and shame. You doubt yourself and also blame yourself for negative outcomes. When you feel like you might fail at something or like you've let someone down, your anxiety becomes so overwhelming that you shut down. He pauses and then asks, how does it feel to hear this? This is obviously back to you writing your description of this scene. And then this is back to you here. I'm so stunned, I almost don't know what to say. That sounds like my exact experience of life.
So I had said to this doctor during the testing that in undergrad, one of my focuses had been psychology, and I was really interested in psychology. And so he came to the house after the testing and asked me if it would be meaningful to me to kind of go over my results in person instead of just reading them in this report. And I was like, yeah, I would love that, to like hear it from a psychologist directly and be able to have a conversation about it. And you know, it's interesting. This is actually like the first time that I've had what I wrote like read back to me. I've obviously read it out loud, but even when you were reading it to me, I was like, oh yeah, it's right. It is right there. Like you can hear the difference between what is happening externally and what is happening internally, like conscientiousness, openness. These are all things that are exterior, and it is how I am, but it's also how other people experience me, that I like show up for things on time. You know, I have friends that are like, oh, I know that like you're always going to be the first person there. like, and then the other things of like the guilt and shame and not wanting to get in trouble or not wanting to let someone down, not wanting to let myself down. Those are such interior emotions. And so, yeah, I think even when he was saying those things to me, I could hear and see the dichotomy of how I go through the world and how I feel internally as I go through the world, and how different they are.
And that difference, that delta, is the source of a lot of pain and discomfort, anxiety, depression, etc.
Yes, I think a lot. A lot. It can feel very isolating at times. I think you can come away from social situations feeling incredibly misunderstood, feeling as though the people closest to you don't understand you, feeling like you're always on the precipice of sort of intense anxiety flooding. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of a source of anxiety and stress and depression.
Beneath all of that is, I believe, a diagnosis of and I'm looking at the terminology here, attachment disorder.
I'm not a psychologist, so I cannot speak to this with, I can only sort of talk about how it impacted me and what I learned about it with myself. And a lot of the issues that I displayed, or characteristics or emotions, or I don't want to say issues, but I did, has to do with your attachments to people, and often your primary attachments growing up, and how you relate to sort of your primary caregivers and your immediate family, and they sort of inform then how you attach with people later in life.
Well, to the extent that you're comfortable talking about it, and I know it might be hard because I think your mom listens to the show.
She's a huge Dan Harris fan.
Much love to your mom, and with much love to your mom and the understanding, I say this as a parent, that all parents are imperfect. What is your sense of what happened there in your childhood that would have led to this attachment disorder that seems to have, spiraled into some real problems as a grown-up?
Of course, yes, what you just said. Like, I do want to preface it by saying that, like, I love my parents very much. They gave me a great life. I have a relationship with both of them now that is good. And I really do think that they were both, like, doing the best that they could. And I think most people are doing the best that they can. But I also think that my mom and I were very different, and we are very different in the way that we approach conflict, or just how we sort of react to things. And she was, in my time growing up, a very reactive person. And I think didn't always quite know how to parent an incredibly sensitive child, which I was. The alchemy of that was a bit of a recipe for some attachment issues.
What about with your dad?
My relationship with him was different than my mom, I think, because I spent way more time with my mom. She was a stay-at-home mom. So we really had a more intense relationship with my mom than with my dad. And I think there was like a bit of distance with my relationship with my dad, which I think you can kind of feel in the book as well, that there were things going on between the two of them as well that I think were very like all-consuming, and also not the best environment for kids to be around. They're divorced now, and I say this in my book where I think that they were a couple that probably should have gotten divorced long before they did.
Well, now that we're on the subject of your dad, it kind of brings us to a huge, if not dominant theme in the book, which we are, halfway through this interview and we haven't gotten to, which is men. The book, as a reminder, is called Men Have Called Her Crazy, which I think is a great title. And I believe I told you that many, many months ago when we were talking off mic. So maybe without me asking a pointed question, maybe you can just say a little bit about why this book, which I guess could have just been about very, starkly and pointedly about your time in psychiatric care, really evolved into a book that weaves that into your relationships with men and to men writ large?
It felt impossible not to do. It almost wasn't even a question of like my life from the time I was young until now and continuing going forward. I feel so aware of the differences between how men and women are treated, how they're able to move through the world, how success is defined, how they're defined in public, how my life has been impacted by men. I couldn't tell my life experience without that being a huge part of it. We live in a patriarchy, and I think like I feel it all the time.
Is it weird then to be having this discussion with me, given my chromosomal makeup?
It's not. It's actually I revel in the opportunity to talk to a man about my experience with men. And it's I've also had like amazing experiences with men, and it's not like I think that they're all bad, though I do think they're all slightly problematic. But like my therapist when I got out of the hospital was a man. He was my therapist for 3 years. I never thought I would have a male therapist. And it was like the best thing I could have done. And part of what was so great about it is that I got to say, this is my experience in the world. This is why I'm so angry. These are the things I've experienced. And he had to listen to it and hear it. And I found that there were times when I had a female therapist where I would be like, I would say that and it was just like, yeah, fuck men. And like they're experiencing it too, but there was something really healing and cathartic about saying it to a man and being like, no, you're sitting here. You can't go anywhere. You have to listen to this.
Let's just go back to the comment you made a minute or two ago about all men being slightly problematic. What do you mean by that?
Well, listen, I think that this exists on a continuum as well, because I'm coming at this from the experience of like a straight white woman. So like, my experience in the world is not all that different from a straight white man, but it also is. The gap between what it is to be a man and to be a woman, I think, is huge. When I say the problematic thing, I don't mean individual men. What I sort of mean is the social construct that is holding up the patriarchy. And like, I think there are so many things about it that are unavoidable. Like I think about when I was dating and I would be on dating apps and men would be like, so where do you live? And I would be like, I'm not going to tell you where I live. And just that person is not a bad person, but it didn't dawn on them that a single woman wouldn't want to say where she lives, and that might make her uncomfortable. I think there is just an ease with which men move through the world that women do not have.
Yeah, that feels right to me. I don't want to call myself an expert. I'm an expert on what it's like to be this man. So I don't want to speak for all men, but it does seem right that we move through the world with a lot of ease that's unacknowledged on our parts that can lead to insensitivity. That
in and of itself is maddening to me. That I recognize I'm like, that doesn't make you a bad person. But when things like that happen, I am now at a point in my life where I'm sort of like, come on. Like, just have a little bit more awareness of just these small things. I think that it goes a long way for women to have, it's like, God, the bar is so low, but it's like, just be like, oh yeah, I'm not okay. Yeah. Don't ask this woman where she lives. Don't ask her if she wants a ride home. She's probably not going to want to get into a car with a stranger. Don't ask her. I had men when I was dating who would ask me to have dates at like private places. And it's just like, you're living in a different world. That's not the world I'm living in.
Let me read, just picking up on the undercurrent of frustration, if not anger, in those comments. There's a little passage from the book. I'm going to read this to you, and then maybe you can just free associate on the other side.
Yeah.
Here it is. Here's the thing about men lying to women while telling them they are crazy or overreacting. The lying, the underplaying on their side, makes us doubt our intuition and intelligence. So eventually, when suspicions are confirmed, when we find out that we have been correct all along, we do go batshit fucking crazy, and it is warranted.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have like confronted a man about something, and they've been like, no, no, that didn't happen. No, you're wrong. And I think that it's more, I do try and understand, I think, where it's coming from on their side, where it is a self-preservation. It is an avoidance. It is a like, oh, this is touchy and I don't want to deal with this now. So I'm going to say something that's going to divert the conversation. That is always worse. And I think women are very intuitive. There has always been this sort of aura around women that like, oh, women are crazy. Like, she went through my email. She read my diary. She did this, that, and the other. She's crazy. And it's like, well, how many times did she ask you to tell the truth before she went into the email? I'm not condoning going into email. It's not anything I've ever done. But I think that there's a way in which we're told, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and then you're not wrong. And then it's like everything comes out. And then people point to that and go, she's crazy.
The 10% Happier podcast is available early and ad-free over on our companion app, which is also called 10% Happier. No ads. And like I said, you get it early, about a week before everybody else does. Relatable wisdom, no distractions. Download the 10% Happier app wherever you get your apps. Let me read you another passage. I don't hate men. I still want to fuck them. I still want to love them. I've simply changed the way I relate to them and what of myself I'm willing to give. I no longer get lost inside the abyss of the other. There is space between us now. It's shocking how much faster I recover from an ending when I don't have to disentangle my sense of self from the other person. I can at times feel mad at the men who came before this moment because I know for sure no man has ever had to work so hard to disentangle himself from me. You were so stupid, I want to tell myself, but I redirect my thoughts to something more constructive. You're so lucky to have learned this now. It will keep you safe and happy. My brain makes a slight amendment. Maybe not totally happy, but perhaps happier. I'm still me after all. I still do feel like I'm dying after a breakup, and I want to normalize this feeling. It's okay to feel this way within a healthy context. So there's a lot in that chunk that I just read to you, but what comes up for you as I read that?
Something that has been like my life's work in relationship, especially romantic relationships with men, is I think a lot of times women are we're really taught to be agreeable and to kind of like go with the flow. And if you're not agreeable, then you're difficult. And I really never wanted to be difficult because I saw how being difficult hindered things for me. It made people break up with me. It created arguments. There was always this thing of kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna do the path of least resistance. And I think in that sense, could get very lost in what do I want and how am I contorting myself to make this other person happy that doesn't feel authentic to who I am? And coming to terms with that, which is very difficult because you are putting yourself more at risk when you can speak up for yourself, say the things that you want, or have healthy conflict, right? There's a chance that you can greet another person that way and they'll sort of retreat and be like, oh God, no, that I don't want that. Or, so I think that when you come to a relationship in that way, there's way more of a chance of rejection, honestly. But being okay with that rejection and being like, okay, I stayed true to myself and I'm going to be me. And if someone sort of can't meet me where I am, then they're just not the right person. It doesn't mean that I should be someone different so that this person will like me.
It kind of goes back to distress tolerance. Maybe let's see if I can make this connection. But you, even though it was uncomfortable to subsume your personality into the other, it did keep you safe in a way, and it gave you a sense of control in some way too. So it doesn't seem utterly unrelated to cutting.
No, I think control and belonging, right? Like the human instinct is to be in relationship with other people. Nobody wants to feel unloved or rejected. And so I found myself figuring out ways in my relationship that I could save myself from being rejected, save myself from feeling unlovable. But that's work you have to do on your own. And really, I realize what it is building up the tolerance to the distress and being able to sit with an emotion of, okay, that person, I brought my authentic self to this situation and there was a conflict and I wanted to deal with it and I wanted to talk about it. And that person wasn't at that point where they could do that. And therefore they broke up with me or, didn't like me anymore. And I just have to be like, that's okay. But it also sucks. You have to like learn how to be okay with feeling some sort of rejection and understanding that it's not necessarily about you or it doesn't make you unlovable. And that's very hard to do, I think.
It's been a minute since we've spoken in real life, but you've made several references to when I was dating. So are you now no longer dating?
I am not dating at the moment. Yeah, I mean, I'm in a relationship now. I sometimes wonder though, like even if I wasn't, if right now I would be dating.
And now I'm drawing a little bit from our private conversations, but because dating is just so arduous emotionally.
Yeah, I find it very, very arduous emotionally. And, for that exact, like, it's not like I have everything figured out. Like there is a point where things don't work out with a bunch of people in a row, or, you know, and you do sort of feel like the rejection or the unbelonging or the unlovableness. And you're like, oh, okay, I got to take a break from this because I'm putting my own self-worth in how somebody else is experiencing me. And that's sort of not a healthy way to live. Not that I think, also, I will say, I absolutely am not one of those people that thinks that like we should 100% be able to like stand on our own and generate everything we need from the inside. Like that, to me, that's not how life works. We live in relationship with other people. And so I think that to be in relationship is incredibly important. You can't just be like an island.
I was interested to see that you are actively thinking about whether you want to have kids. And I was remembering you were one of the first people to come visit us when Bianca and I, when we had Alexander 9 years ago, and you were adamant that you did not want to have children.
Yes.
And so that's, I guess I'm curious what's changed, and also like how would it go for you if you had a boy?
I mean, I still really don't see that as like my path in life. I think, you know, in the book I do write about freezing my eggs, and that felt like an insurance policy, a very expensive insurance policy. But I think that I wanted to be open to the possibility of an accident or changing my mind. But it is very hard to picture me as a parent of a son. But I think that I would also like love any child that I had. I would be, you know, I wouldn't like lock him in the basement or something. I could rise to the occasion. And I think, yeah. And also like I've been around you and Bianca and Alexander, and I feel like he's such a like cool, sensitive boy.
Yes, and yet, you know, I was a sensitive boy, and then really got pulled into the sort of classic male cover-up,
Yeah,
macho bullshit. Not that I could really pull off machismo, given that I'm very small as a human. But you know, being rough on my exterior, et cetera, as a way of pretending that there was no vulnerability beneath. And so, yeah, Alexander's a sensitive boy now, but, you know, when the world sets in on you as you get older, lots of, you know, tricky things can happen.
there's a whole scene in my book where I have that conversation with a partner, saying how I really think with boys, raising boys, so much of it's not what's happening at home. Like you can raise a son with the absolute best intentions, but our world is sort of pervasively male. And once they're exposed to the outside world, I think a lot is out of your control.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way?
Absolutely. But, you know, my parents were proto hippies, you know, early hippies. And my mom, you know, was a pioneering female full professor at Harvard Med School. I had a very strong female role model in the house. And so then I go to junior high, and, things happen, and you pick up bad attitude, bad influences from whatever, Hollywood, from the early Beastie Boys tracks, from your friends, that maybe didn't have enlightened parents, and off to the races you go.
I very much had like an inverse of that, where my mom too was kind of the She was a very strong force. She was the main force in the family. And she was and is, and I say this lovingly, a force to be reckoned with. And so, and what's very interesting about her as well is that she, even when I talk to her now, she often doesn't see the differences between like men and women and how they go through the world. And so sometimes I'll talk to her about like the male female dynamic, and she'll be like, oh yeah, I don't feel that way at all. Or like, no, I never felt that way with men. Kind of like, yeah, because you're a like you person. She really embodies herself. And so when I was young, I was like that too. I was like a firecracker. And I got into trouble a lot in like middle school or even early high school, where I would kind of like, I was like a brat. Like I would like talk back to the male teachers, and I kind of had this like punk rock, like I don't give any fucks about anything attitude. And then I like went out into the real world, and I was like, oh shit, like this is different than what my home was. Women are not in control here. I'm not in control. I am at the mercy of like all of these men around me. And what the fuck is this? And I think I closed in on myself in a major way to keep myself safe.
Funny, I'm just thinking back on knowing you I met you in like 2006 or 7 or something like that. And
I think it was 2008.
2008. Okay. And yeah, I think you very, very much struck me as shy and introverted early, but getting to know you, I would not, I mean, you are an introvert. I mean,
yes.
Or as your doctor diagnosed you, you're an anti-extrovert in some ways, but I wouldn't describe you in private as, when you're comfortable, as a shrinking violet.
No, not at all. And I think that is also like a really, just going back to the sort of the exterior, interior as well is when I am in groups or when I am in social situations where I'm uncomfortable or like I don't feel understood or something. Yeah, like I'm so quiet. I'm sure that I remember some of those like Hamptons parties that we would go to when we first met, and like I probably didn't say a word all night. I was just kind of like, these aren't my people, and I don't think anyone here understands me, and everyone thinks I'm dumb, and I don't have money, and I'm just gonna shut up. But then when I'm with people who I'm very comfortable with, who know me well, then I feel like that's sort of the real me.
I see so many similarities between your description of your inner world and what I think I understand about the inner world of Bianca. I actually asked her whether she thought we should do this interview together, because we do sometimes do interviews together. And she said no, just because it would be too weird, given how close she is with you. But like, I wonder if, I think I'm now understanding why the two of you hit it off so early and powerfully.
There's a whole chapter in the book about my time in the Hamptons. I felt like such an outsider in that world. I knew I was a fish out of water. I knew that everybody was looking at me and was like, why is this person here? And when I met Bianca, I feel like, even though, I don't know, Bianca's maybe 8 or 9 years older than me, but we like met and it was like, you're my ally here. Like, you understand. Like, you think these people are a little crazy, right? Like, and so we would end up having like so many conversations, just the two of us, that it like wasn't small talk, or, we would like talk about really deep life things. And she was one of the few saving graces of that time in my life.
She will be happy to hear that. I want to go back to you used this term earlier, the patriarchy, and you were kind of questioning me a little bit about, what my take is on all of this as a man, and this is not an original observation at all. So I don't want to pretend that I am coining anything here, but sexism is actually really bad for men. And it has, I kind of referred to this obliquely earlier, my junior high experience where being a sensitive boy and then taught that any displays of weakness are unacceptable, that reduces your emotional repertoire down to a nub in ways that are bad for you. And so like I don't really think anybody's, well, maybe somebody's winning in all of this, but I think most people are losing.
I totally agree with that. And I will say no part of me thinks that like the emotional handicap that men I feel go through life with is that I would want it. I don't. And I have this conversation with my female friends a lot where we will be like, damn, like we feel really bad for men. Like when I have this group of female friends that I can talk to them about anything, I can go to them with the smallest or the biggest problem. We all talk about things we're insecure about. Like just this past week, one of them was like, do you guys have imposter syndrome? And we were all like, yes, like, let me list all of the reasons why we have imposter syndrome. And some of us, we were also like, I feel like I have imposter syndrome with you guys as a friend. Like, I feel like I'm not doing good enough as a friend. And we were all like, no, everybody's doing great. Like, we just like the conversations that we have and the level of deepness, like there is an intimacy in my female relationships that my romantic relationships with men have never, and I don't think will ever rival, because I have not met a man who can kind of go there the way that women can go there. And I think that it creates such amazingly close, special relationships when you can have that sort of emotional intimacy with someone. And, I look at so many of my friends, we talk about how like their dads don't have friends. Their dads live these very kind of lonely, insular lives. And I'm like, damn, that is not going to be my experience. I have like this group of women around me that I love, and like the feeling is mutual,
This is a bit of a non sequitur, but if there's a guy listening who may in his lesser moments feel the reflex to dismiss the behavior of the women in his life as crazy, what would you say to him?
To be honest, first, because I am interested in people and I like to know why they do things that they're doing, I would be like, what behavior is she doing that is setting you off? And why is it setting you off? Because I think that the root of understanding why we get upset at other people is understanding the thing that it is triggering in us. And so what I would say to a guy is like, can you take a moment to think about what it was that it triggered in you that made you upset? What's the thing that made you mad? What are you afraid of? What's underneath the anger? Because I think what's underneath anger a lot of times is fear. And I would urge men to really like look at that, because I think when you can look at that, it allows you to kind of drop it a little. And then when you can drop it, like the relationships that you can have with people are just exponential and exponentially better.
If I just kind of interpolate back through my own personal experience, maybe she would disagree, but I don't think I'm in the habit of calling Bianca crazy now or in the past. But it's possible that I'm letting myself off the hook here. But I know that I've had sort of irrational levels of anger, especially in the past, to when she would get emotional, and I would tell myself she was being overly emotional, and the fear that was beneath that was that I was incapable of love, of being a good partner in those moments. But I had no visibility into that until the last couple of years. So anyway, that tracks very closely with what you just said.
I think women, and I do this too. Like, I don't think it's just men. I think everyone kind of does this. I think that men are like more apt to kind of like stonewall in situations. So that is sort of what I'm reacting to in those moments. But yeah, I think if you can also, I think about like if I was having a conversation with someone and they were getting mad at my reaction about something, and then they were able to kind of drop their ego for a moment and be like, the reason why this is upsetting to me is because I'm afraid of what it means about me. Like, the way that would change my whole reaction to the conversation, I think it's like how disarming. And when you're able to kind of be upfront with what you're feeling, you have to, of course, first be able to identify what you're feeling and put language to what you're feeling, which is a whole other skill that I think is important to learn. But in those moments, to be able to say the thing you're really feeling, I think it neutralizes conflict pretty quickly. Because if someone said that to me, I would be like, oh God, like, like that sounds awful and scary. And I don't experience you as a bad partner. And what can we do so that we both feel like we're getting the thing that we need?
I think the stonewalling, as speaking as a veteran stonewaller, is not a aggressive strategy. Like I just for myself, like I don't think I was doing it deliberately as like a tactic. It was more dissociation. Like I just was absenting myself because I couldn't handle it. And it was raising these fears that I was not actually really fully in touch with. So I didn't have, as I said before, visibility into them. So it was the only option available to me, or at least that's the way it felt.
I would also be so curious to know, like, if that somehow makes it easier to identify and correct, because I've certainly been on the receiving end of that type of stonewalling, and also the more aggressive type where it's like you're being punished. And I wonder if the kind that you are experiencing would be any more or less difficult to, I don't know. It would be interesting to me to know.
I don't want to let myself off the hook here because I do think I've done the you're being punished stonewalling plenty of times. But I actually think that beneath all of it is still the fear.
Okay. So it was like identifying that, which allowed you to, move past the...
I think of shame as psychic constipation. It just stops everything up. You know, it's like when you're in that zone, like nothing good can happen. And you're highly disincentivized against like looking at it because you're wrapped up in the shame of it. That's just going to make it worse, is the story you're telling yourself. So only when there's like some empathy in the system, some warmth in the system, some understanding, can you unlock and do what you were calling for earlier, which is to say, hey, I'm sorry. The reason why I'm freaking out right now is because it's raising my fears of being incapable of love. Like that requires years of therapy.
Which is why I find romantic relationships so difficult, is because I feel like I come up against a lot the people where I'm like, oh, this is going to take a while Yeah, there's some things that need to be worked out here. Does it go a long way to, in those moments, have somebody else, whoever you're talking to, whether it be Bianca or someone else, be like, I'm saying this to you and I don't think that you're a bad person. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that you're a bad person. Because I feel like that is something I have dealt with so many men that I feel like have that exact piece of shame where it's like, if you're mad at me about something, you're saying that I'm a piece of shit person. And I'm like, no, that is absolutely not what I'm saying. I think that you're a great person. You did a thing that hurt my feelings.
It does go a long way because that is, for me at least, that is what the core of it is. The accusation, I go right to a whole shame-based story and then nothing happens. You're constipated, the whole relationship. This is just from my point of view. So I'm not, I think I've had an easier go of it in relationships than you have. And I think I feel pretty comfortable saying that based on knowing you for a while. I think, and this, again, is not an original observation. I think I'm stealing this from our couples counselor, Michael Vincent Miller, who's awesome. And by the way, just side note, couples counseling, especially as a preventative measure, I just want to put a shout out, a plug in for that. I think it's really helpful. It's been very helpful to me and Bianca. I think that Michael, I believe it's Michael, or maybe it's Esther Perel, or both of them have said that, you can look at romantic relationships as a crucible for like an extraordinary amount of personal growth. And so as hard and frustrating and demoralizing as they can be, like they are, a lot of good can happen in the tough stuff.
100%. And I think like that's also goes back to what I was saying earlier about how like we as humans learn in relationship with other people. So like I learn about myself in relationship with other people, and we all do that. We learn about our triggers. We learn about the things that make us feel good and the things that we want and need. And so I've actually like so far to no avail have tried to get some of my partners to do like early preventative couples therapy as a way to just be like, hey, let's figure out like how we can best talk to each other. But it's a hard thing to convince people to do, I find.
Yeah, Bianca tried for years. It took me a while before I listened to her. So yeah.
You're a lucky man. You have an angel for a wife.
I will not argue with you on that. As we near the end of our allotted time, let me just ask, so it's been, I'm not great at math, but I think about 3.5 years since you checked yourself into the facility.
Yes. 3.5.
So I want to ask how you're doing now, but I'm going to do, for the last time, I'm going to read you back to you and then let you kind of answer the question on the back end of this little section I'm going to read to you. Here it is. Now I'm a new person. Life has in no way gotten easier. In so many ways, it has become harder, but I've become sturdier. I'm now a sturdy person, someone who feels tremendous emotions, but who knows how to acknowledge those feelings, sit with them, communicate them if need be, and then let them go.
None of that, also, I will say, is easy to do. And it's not like it's not like I don't have anxiety anymore. It's not like I don't have depression anymore. I am a person with big emotions, but I have learned how to exist with them instead of them overtaking me, which I think has been the most beneficial thing. And it's not that I don't feel sad. I mean, I just this week, I'm having a really hard week, but I can kind of say okay, I know why I'm having a hard week. And I'll talk about it with my therapist, or I'll talk about it with a friend, and then I can kind of let it go and come to this and be excited to have this conversation with you. And, you know, it's like the bad thing doesn't have to color everything. The anxiety doesn't have to color everything. I can live in the continuum that my brain gives me, which is a wide continuum of emotion. And I now see it as something that is such a gift. I mean, it is hard. I think I still at times find it very hard to be in my head and to live my internal life that I'm living. But I also see it as a gift. And the things that it's allowed me to do. I think it allowed me to write this book. I think it allowed me to create some of the art that I've created in the past few years. It allows me to be a really good friend and a really good partner. And yeah, I feel very proud of myself for where I have come to.
Well, I'm proud of you too. What you just described is a huge achievement, to be able to be okay, equanimous, no matter what's happening. Not all the time, but more of the time than you used to be. It's a massive achievement.
Thank you. I also feel like you've seen me in some low moments.
Yeah, well, that's part of friendship.
Yeah.
It's also, I just want to say, a huge achievement to write a book. So on that note, can you just remind everybody of the name of the book and also any other, like, you know, is there a website, social media place that you want to direct us to?
Yeah. So the name of the book is Men Have Called Her Crazy. It's out on August 13th. Anywhere that you buy books, ebook, hardcover, audiobook, which I narrate. And my Instagram is Anna M. Tendler, where I post artwork and information about the book and photos of me from high school.
Which are adorable, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything that we missed before I let you go?
I don't think so. I think that covered a lot.
Well, it was your first interview. You did great.
Thanks. I blacked out. I have no idea what I said.
We got you. You're good.
Okay, good.